Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another scarily hilarious edition of Monster Party.
Monster Party!
Monster Party!
Monster Party! This is a huge show.
It's, you know what? It's gargantuan.
It is.
It's monster sized.
It is.
It's giant monster. It's kaiju sized.
Daikaiju.
Daikaiju, yeah, the best kind of kaiju.
And that is because we have a very, very special guest tonight.
With our very special topic.
Yes, indeed. Our topic is Back to the 80s.
Back to the 80s!
Oh, please, please, God, no.
Back to the... No, the 80s is a great time, Matt.
Okay.
Great time.
Can we eliminate 81?
No,
that was my junior year.
No, 81 is a great year.
We could eliminate 85, I think.
No, we're not eating. No.
All right, we'll embrace all the 80s.
And this is also horror and sci-fi.
Yes.
It's just not the 80s in general.
No.
And we're talking about the 1980s and not octogenarians. Let's just be clear about
true.
that.
Well, I'm prepared for both. So back to the clamshell, I think is what we're really talking
James, who is our guest?
Our special guest is an author and director, a screenwriter, and basically a film historian who seems to have an encyclopedic knowledge of the movie industry in general. And this is COURTNEY JOYNER.
Oh, good.
Thank you. Thanks for being with us.
Yes, no, this is the dream come true.
Is it?
Yes, it is.
To be here with us on Monster Party.
I am so sorry. We got to take you out.
Well, I'm not saying that my bar is not set particularly high. It's just right here by War of the Gargantuas and a 16 projector. What's better than that?
No, hey, right. It's how we roll.
And Courtney, I'm so glad that you're here because, what's exciting to me about the 80s, you have to remember, listeners, you have to understand that the 80s was a very exciting time. I mean, think about it. There were a lot of, in the United States at that time, there was a lot of optimism at that time, and Ronald Reagan had gotten office, and it was the MTV era. We started to create the MTV and these music videos.
There was prosperity.
Yes.
You were optimistic in the 80s?
Yes, I was, Matt.
I was a punk rocker. We hated Reagan.
There was greed and there was hypocrisy.
Yeah.
Okay. Look, I'm just saying.
The me decade.
I was yes, but I'm just saying that
because it was optimistic because it was about you. I got
and getting two toys and one that's mint in package. I said two toys. One that's mint in package, and you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, I do.
But it was a very exciting time, and there were a lot of great movies made in the 80s.
And we were also of an age where we were going to a lot of movies because we were in our teens going into our 20s. And I think I went to like 3 movies a week at least.
Yeah.
There was kind of
a lot of horror movies, a lot of genre stuff.
Yeah, there's a horror boom really in the 80s. I mean, it kind of started, right?
Well, the thing was, of course, you were looking at the era that really was the great benefit of the VHS explosion.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And there were so many movies that we never could have seen if there were not a VCR around.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, but that also meant that there were all these companies that knew they would get big money for any product because all these stores, and these were the mom and pops before Blockbuster and Hollywood Video and all that stuff, were just dying for things on their shelves.
Yeah.
And so every single company, my gosh, I graduated from USC in 1982. And back in those days, if you were trying to put together your independent movie or what have you, just around Hollywood itself, there were 24 companies or 36 companies, and you couldn't hit all now you could hit them all and go have lunch.
Yeah.
Right.
But everybody was raking in so much money because remember too, VHS in those days, that was rental only, and every one of those tapes was what, $70?
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, it was before the budget window opened.
That's right.
Nobody could buy them.
No, it was like you would find those things like film classics in the grocery store, but even those were like $24.95 to get your copy of Terror by Night or Night of the Living Dead, of course,
the public
or the Indestructible Man.
Dementia 13.
That's right.
Right. The print of Night of the Living Dead that was run over by a truck, apparently.
Right.
Which, that actually made it a little creepier,
Yeah,
too.
I agree.
Yes, it did.
Yes,
it did.
Yeah.
And of course, as far as the early 80s go, even though it wasn't technically an 80s film, Halloween, John Carpenter's Halloween in 78, just started a whole new trend. I mean, and then Friday the 13th in 80. I mean, that's kind of changed a lot, right?
Well, you were talking about two upstart movies. What Irwin Yablans did. Now, remember, Irwin had been the head of distribution at Paramount before he became an independent producer. So he knew this world backwards and forwards. And he and Carpenter had the great success with Assault on Precinct 13.
Great film.
Wonderful movie. And they bankroll what was originally, remember, the Babysitter Murders.
Uh-huh.
And they put this thing out. And, it was a slow process, but they went ahead and knowing that market, knowing where it would play on the urban areas, know where it would play in rural areas. Of course, there were still drive-ins in those days.
Yeah.
And it changed absolutely everything. Because the big studios were still trying to figure out what they were doing, and then suddenly something like The Legend of Boggy Creek or whatever would break box office records. And they're like, well, where do we fit into this? And then Halloween blows it off. And, of course, Friday the 13th was a Paramount movie. Paramount picks up that movie, so they jumped in with both feet.
And they that studio got a lot of flack for that, too, right? Like, oh
big
my God,
flack. And remember, they tried to
releasing.
hide the fact that they were releasing the movie. They were embarrassed by it.
Yeah.
But it's funny because, like, that opened the floodgates of, like, the slasher boom, and it was like every holiday, there was a mad killer. I mean,
oh yeah,
still on the list. It was Happy Birthday to Me.
Oh yeah,
New Year's Evil, Graduation Day, Hell Night, My Bloody Valentine, Prom Night. I mean, it's amazing.
April Fool's Day.
Yeah,
Kwanzaa Killers.
No, I don't remember
that
Kwanzaa Killers. I don't remember that one.
But that was also, I think, a weird period where because we've started to make movies and get some things happening, but what I saw as a shift in the genre, I actually didn't think was too cool. Now, I was not going to go out and paint the one sheet for Maniac yellow when that happened.
Right.
Remember? And of course, there was always the big suspicion that Bill Lustig actually was doing it himself just because there was the controversy around it.
Right.
But horror movies went through that period where they were so focused on violence. And I think it actually hurt the genre. The supernatural element and everything else started to go away. And of course, the POV of the killer thing, don't go in the house and these types of movies. I was like, wow, I don't know where we were going. And remember, too, guys, I mean, we would go to horror conventions and people were selling things like car accident videos and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, no, I want it
and
fake.
Faces of Death.
No.
I want my horror fake.
It's funny you should say that because in one way, Halloween is criticized for, oh my gosh, it's a slash bloody film, and we talked about this on another show.
There's not a single drop of blood.
Absolutely
but
not.
It created something in people's mind that, oh my God, it's that bloody thing. And then I think
the crass imitators
throughout the 80s, I think it started and it slowly built. There started to be a bigger emphasis of trying to make it more slasher-like and gorier. I remember, as a matter of fact, I remember the magazine Fangoria. Remember Fangoria?
Oh yes, of course.
So Fangoria started out. Remember, the very first issue had
Godzilla on the cover. Absolutely,
I have that.
That's right.
Mint condition, mind you. The poster still
you got
folded.
two of them. We know.
Yeah, but it's still. I mean, it's great shape.
No,
but
you're right. But
it started with that, and then the cover
Fangoria,
cover was a monster.
Right.
Then it came out with Prophecy. Remember, it was a monster, and then slowly
it
but
was
surely,
it kind of started out almost like an '80s version of Famous Monsters of Film.
Yeah.
And then it got to a point.
Changed.
Then it got to a point where they had a centerfold that was a gore shot.
Absolutely.
I remember because I got a subscription. There was a moment when I got the issue, and on the cover was an exploding head. And on one hand...
Yeah, but that's awesome.
I think actually, was that from Dawn of the Dead or was that from Scanners?
Probably
Scanners.
It was, I think it was from Scanners, but that's the point, how it was almost like this gore factor. Hey, let's try and throw as much gore at you as possible.
But still, you see, there was a science fiction element to Scanners, and there was what I was always kind of getting a little queasy about was that there was almost a pornographic quality to what were considered horror movies at that point that literally were crime dramas because all they were following some psychopath as he went around slicing the throats of girls and what have you. And those moments were like the big sex moments of the movies.
But what's interesting, though, is it did take a turn, though, to the fantasy kind of aspect when you had Nightmare on Elm Street and Hellraiser, and you started getting into slasher elements, but with more fantasy.
But even Friday the 13th, like those movies, it's funny how I've actually really grown to love them because they found that right little sort of perfect niche of a gore film, a slasher movie, and comedy because there is a fantasy element with Jason. There's no killer like Jason. He keeps coming back again and again after he's been blown up or drowned or.
I actually pitched on Freddy versus Jason.
Oh, really?
I didn't get the job, but I will reveal right now what my idea was. And I thought this was wonderful. Mm-hmm. I went in, I said, guys, here's the whole deal. We've never truly explained what Jason Voorhees' problem is. His problem is he is the Elm Street kid that got away and so traumatized by Freddy Krueger. This is what he has turned into.
That's interesting, yeah.
Yep. And anyway, I didn't get the gig. Doggone you, Sean Cunningham.
By the point when they got to Freddy versus Jason, it was more like a fantasy kind of comedy. I mean, but yeah, you're right. When you're talking about the early kind of like, I mean, when you're talking about like Maniac and Don't Go in the House and don't answer the phone.
Yeah, there's a very lurid quality to all those movies.
Misogynistic quality to them, absolutely. But it was like anybody can make a slasher film and make money, it seemed like back then. I mean, you know?
Well, the gates were just so open again because the need for product was so enormous and everything was making money. And independent horror, because of Friday the 13th, because of Halloween, because of Dawn of the Dead, and films like it was just if it had a monster in it, if it had a pretty girl being chased by a killer with a knife, whatever it was, you put it, and remember, this was put it in the theater. And then it would explode on video because everything we're talking about played in the movie theaters.
Right.
Yeah.
There was also the midnight outlet because midnight movie screenings were just getting really big. Too, I think.
And also, I think you think about it, unless I'm mistaken, not since the 30s and 40s, when you had Frankenstein, Dracula, the Wolfman, the Mummy, the 80s literally had a whole new army of boogeymen for the screen. In other words, like. In the 80s, you'd be like, oh, watch out, Jason's going to get you, or watch out, Freddy's going to get you. You didn't have that since the Universal horror films.
No, the creation of like trademark monsters or trademark villains was
Michael Myers.
It was like kind of a reinvention of that catalog of creatures going way back to the 30s. Absolutely,
totally. Jason, Freddy, Michael, Pinhead, Chucky, all these characters were like the new boogeyman for this generation. You know?
Where's that Rat Pack movie?
But Sean, wouldn't you also agree that although I mean when they were making these slasher movies, I think most people would say to themselves, "Hey, it's easy to do a slasher movie." Okay, it's cheap. But when you do a low-budget science fiction film, now that's a little different, because, okay, you got to create some kind of sets, you got to have some kind of costumes, you got to put a little robot in there.
Or we also
well, that's when the tatters start to show because, but that was always the beauty of the post-apocalyptic thing because you just go out to a junkyard in Chatsworth,
put on some hockey gear,
Richard Lynch sitting on top of a pile of old cars giving orders, and you got it.
But also, what was exciting about that time too is, so you had filmmakers who were trying to think of, okay, we need to think of creative, cost-effective ways to do special effects or whatever it was, and to make this futuristic world. Like a cool film that I really like from 1980, that's Battle Beyond the Stars.
Oh yeah. Well, that was still kind of a little bit of a. That was, taking off of the success of Star Wars.
Well,
It was Corman's version of Star Wars.
Well, of course, too. There's a
Samurai.
movie with just an enormous background because of Cameron and John Sayles scripting it and the whole thing. Yeah,
but that's just it. See, the funny thing is, I remember reading a thing from Gail Ann Hurd where she was talking about Corman was asking, so is there? I hear you have a lot of problems going on the set. She goes, well, there seems to be one guy who knows what he's doing. And that was James Cameron doing all these. He did most of the special effects himself or something.
Like ordering people around and like, wow, you're not the director.
This was still early in his because he didn't direct it. I mean,
but he was still ordering people around.
Yeah.
And also that was probably the biggest budget at the time that Corman ever worked with, right? I think
it was because Battle Beyond the Stars, of course, had kind of an extended shooting period because of the miniatures, and that was something that New World, and which it was New World at that time, that Roger really didn't want to fool with. I don't think extensively.
And he got George Peppard, who this was before A-Team, right? And then
Robert Vaughn
and Richard Thomas from the Waltons. Remember who played John Boy? That was
one of my favorite action heroes.
Well,
Richard Thomas.
No. It's he was trying to break out of that whole John Boy thing, you know.
I remember You'll Like My Mother with Patty Duke and Richard Thomas was a psychopath. Remember that one? Yeah.
See, he's trying to break out. You know, he's trying to get rid of that whole John Boy thing.
I love him. He's on The Americans. Come on.
Yes, he is.
Plus, in the tradition of Roger Corman, he of course recycled a lot of his special effects footage for later movies.
Yeah.
Oh God, he reused that stuff for absolutely Galaxy of Terror and all those movies. They would
Space
pull those
Raiders,
shots.
yeah.
Space Raiders, absolutely. Well, that was always the beauty. You know, Roger was going to spend the money. It was going to be respent and respent and respent.
Well, and as a Doctor Who fan, when it comes to some of those movies, those 80s sci-fi movies, I do have a special place in my heart for them because there's a certain joy of the low rent science fiction movie, of that low rent, okay, let's get some packing materials from a TV set and glue it and paint it gray and then put a light on it, and
it's
I love
practical
that.
effects. It's pre-CGI.
Yeah.
Right.
Were you guys Cinefantastique readers?
Oh yeah. Oh my God. Yeah.
When I was in high school, was the issue that came out about Dark Star, and it yes, remember that they showed
that
the sets and how they built it all from Burger King containers and all that.
Didn't they use milk crates?
Milk
I think
crates,
they milk crates for the floor.
And that elevator, which I still makes me laugh to this day, where it's really just like something on the floor, like a little cart moving on a floor.
Yeah.
But it's filmed with the camera on its side. So see, it's an elevator.
Yeah.
Well, also, not really.
Courtney, your film career started in the 80s, right?
I guess, well, yes, From a Whisper to a Scream and all that. So I graduated from college.
Love that movie.
1982. Oh, thank you very much.
I love that movie.
That's Jeff Burr's movie. I was just very fortunate to be one of the musketeers supporting him.
What was it like working on that film?
Well, we all knew each other because we had all gone to college together. And when we were getting out of school, it was like, well, how do we, we all wanted to make movies. Of course, independent horror was absolutely everywhere. Jeff was working at that time. He'd worked for Jim Wynorski over at GONIS.
We're big fans.
Yeah.
And I had been working with a director named Virgil Vogel, who was a television director over at Universal. And so I was writing scripts with him and working on Airwolf and Knight Rider and things like that. So, So we were all trying to figure out, though, how do you get the first feature done? And it really was, well, how do you grab the money? And we sat down and came up with the idea, and it was Darren Scott and Jeff came up with this idea. Well, let's try and do an independent horror movie. But, of course, we had all loved Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror and all the Amicus anthologies.
I love the anthology movies.
And we decided to go ahead and do that. And that decision, we've talked about this several times. The decision was not just because we wanted to do it and we thought it would be a wonderful thing to do and would be cool and a great throwback, but also we felt that if we ran out of money, we would have completed sections of the movie.
That's brilliant.
That was a big motivator there because we already knew people who'd been trying to do their features and they ran out right in the middle. And then what do you do? Well, you're trying to get your cast back and everyone's 2 years older and all that mess.
Right. Like an Equinox.
Exactly. Yes. Mr. Asmodeus strikes again.
All of a sudden it becomes Boyhood.
Yes, without meaning to. That would be wonderful. I would be, yes, you guys would be doing this in my penthouse on the French Riviera. Come up with that idea.
Yeah, Boyhood was only supposed to be like 6 months, and it ended up taking 14 years.
It felt that way too.
Wow! There we go.
Take
that, Academy.
It's a great film, nominated for Academy Awards.
I'm respectfully, you're full of shit, Larry. It sucks. It blows.
No,
it's a terrible movie.
I'll watch Maniac before I watch.
Yeah,
Boyhood.
I would.
It is.
Yeah,
it is.
But the Bill Lustig Maniac or the Dwayne Esper Maniac.
Double feature.
Okay, there you go.
So the 1980s. The 1980s.
Yes, the 1980s.
Yes. A great time for filmmaking.
And this had like a lot of great actors from several other eras too. You had the great Vincent Price.
Yes.
You had Cameron Mitchell, Martine Beswick. You had a lot of like great characters.
We were very lucky because in the case of like Clu Gulager, I knew Clu. And I'd introduced Jeff to him, and I got to know Clue because also while I was at USC, I was involved with some film societies, and I had done a little documentary about Don Siegel, and I'd had Clue involved with that.
Oh, that's cool.
And actually, first time I met Clue, he was the mayor of Woodland Hills, California.
Really?
Yes, he was.
That's cool.
And so I struck he and his wife Miriam, they were just so dear and so lovely. And so when we started to get the movie together, of course, Clue is a wonderful acting teacher and just an iconic actor, and we wanted him to be involved naturally. And so, I wrote that episode that he was in, and then everybody else. It was I knew a director named Steve Carver. And I would go to parties at his house, and that's how we met Terry Kaiser. Mm-hmm. Jeff and I were actually at the memorial service at the DGA for Robert Aldrich.
Oh, my God.
And we're sitting there behind Harry Caesar, and he gets up and talks about Emperor of the North and stuff, and that's how we got Harry Caesar. We just, said, hey, what? Wow. And so it was great. Rosalind Cash came to us through our friend Oscar Williams, who wrote Black Belt Jones. Mm-hmm. And
that's cool.
He knew Rosalind, and so it was just a wonderful coming together of people. Jeff was determined, though, about Vincent Price. I was the naysayer.
No,
I was.
I
said,
why?
Jeff,
It's Vincent Price.
I know. No, it wasn't that I didn't think he would be a great choice. I said, we will have no chance in the world of getting Vincent Price.
Oh.
And it was just through a bizarre set of circumstances. We actually got his address Jeff got his address from one of those mail order services you used to be able to. And so we go over to Swallow Drive, knock on the door, and Vincent Price came to the door. And he was in an apron because he had been baking bread.
Of course he was. And painting at the same time.
He was just lovely, and he ushers us in. He couldn't have been nicer.
What do you say when you open the door?
No, wait,
Hello, I'm
you guys
Vincent
are
Price.
you guys are like in your 20s now here too, right?
Oh,
you guys
but
are
we're
like
sitting there
kids
going, oh, gee, Mr. Price, we sure would love to have you in our movie. Oh, well, thank you, boys. This sounds delightful. What's he going to say? Probably Coral Brown would probably, the phone to the Beverly Hills Police Department the whole time. But
there's some college hooligans at the door.
Yeah. But we sat in his living room, and he was very nice to us and certainly extremely cordial. But he really wasn't interested. He had just done Mystery with Diana Rigg.
Oh,
right.
And that was such a tremendous show. And he had also been in the Monster Club, the Roy Ward Baker, with Chetwin Hayes stories. And I don't know how he felt about that, but he was kind of in the middle. I think he was just tired of going back to that well.
Right.
Sure.
It's so interesting to me though that like back then like this wasn't through an agent or a manager. You
show up at his door.
You walk up to a legendary horror icon and knock on his door.
I was one of these guys, and I was always writing letters to filmmakers when I was in high school.
Really?
I was corresponding with Don Siegel and John Sturgis and all these guys. I have a letter. It was one of my great treasures from Don Siegel. I asked him for a summer job. He was getting ready to direct Tom Horn. So I get this letter in the mail on Telephone stationery. So there's coolness number one. Okay. He had just finished Telephone, and he writes me this lovely letter telling me he can't give me a job because Steve McQueen's entourage is so large. McQueen would not allow it.
Oh.
So I have a letter from Don Siegel saying that he could not hire Courtney because Steve McQueen
when
would
Steve
allow
McQueen when Steve McQueen job blocks you.
That's it, baby. That's pretty awesome.
Not
Of
my
course,
favorite.
Siegel ended up quitting the movie. But
no.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so Vincent Price now.
But just we were going back to this very good point that. Now, look, any asshole who makes a movie gets a DVD release and gets to yak about it so he thinks he's a celebrity. Right, Screw those guys. I've seen, it's ridiculous. These were the days when, this is the thing, especially filmmakers, to get fan letters and fan mail and everything was, especially for, say, someone with a genre like John Sturgis or whatever. These were wealthy men, but they did not consider themselves public figures or even celebrities. They worked with celebrities.
Right.
They lived very well and what have you. But I think the walls were down a lot more then because also people weren't, being extreme and violent and doing all these terrible things. So I think accessibility was a lot greater then. And trust and all of that stuff. So what we were able to do with Vincent Price is at least get him to give us the chance to make the movie and then come back and have him look at some of it and hold off his final decision at that point. And that's what happened. And his agent was Walter Kohner, who was the Kohner agency, all Paul Kohner. So they came to a screening and he saw a couple of the episodes and he agreed to do it. What happened, though, was when we got Vincent to agree, and I actually don't know what his salary was, but I know it was pretty substantial. Of course, he wanted to buy a piece of artwork or something.
Oh, yeah.
He was gonna,
Right.
And he went away on a cruise, and we got the hot idea of rewriting the stuff so that we could really take advantage of Vincent Price being in the movie. We didn't consult with him, and he was furious. And we were already established over at we'd shot the movie. The movie was primarily shot in Dalton, Georgia, where Jeff and his brother Bill were from, and that's where the money was raised. But we're back here in California. We were shooting out at the Hammond Lumberyard, Roger Corman's studio. We built the sets. And I was with Jeff, and he is getting a ship-to-shore phone call from Vincent Price. Vincent Price yelling at him about the script. It was pretty awful. But really, Price's objection, ultimately, and I don't know that I did a particularly wonderful job, but his objection was the fact that we just kind of went ahead and did this. But this was inexperienced. We were young guys.
Yeah.
We had no idea what we really...
Yeah.
So when he came back to Los Angeles, he did agree to come down and talk to us, which was very generous because he could have just pulled out.
Oh,
But he
totally.
didn't. And I decided to take the heat.
Okay.
Because I was like, I'm not going to have to direct this man. I'll just go. So I went up to Vincent Price and told him the whole thing was my idea. And he had the copy of the script in his hand, and he hits me with the script and goes, "Oh, well, then you're married to shit." Yes. It was a great Vincent Price movie. But he was very, not make him look too terrible. I mean, he was very sweet to us ultimately, and he was very kind to my mother who came and visited on the set. And I'll tell you a weird, like, interpersonal moment with him that I ended up sharing. Susan Tyrell was in the movie as well, and she was great. Susu, she was a real character. And she did a lot of sculptures and a lot of artwork, rather avant-garde. But of course, because of Vincent's incredible status in that world, she wanted his opinion of her work. So I was standing with Vincent Price. We were right at the soundstage door, and Susu had one of the craft service tables, and she covered it with a sheet. And she said, "Oh, Vinny, don't you want to? Here's my artwork. You've got to see my artwork." And we're like, "All right." And Price was kind of stooped over by that time. He was kind of an older man.
Yeah.
So he actually had his hand on my shoulder. She rips the sheet apart, and there in front of us is an entire lineup of vaginas. And they are. Are you? I'm absolutely serious. They're made of clay and they're made of wax, and some of them are made of metal, and there are fists coming out of them and eyes exploding out of them and all this. It was really something. And I'm standing with Vincent Price looking at this display, and Vincent Price leans down next to me. He goes, "Oh, this woman's terribly disturbed." So we shared that moment. So yes,
I take back the whole shit thing.
Yes, it did. That made everything better. Yes.
Oh my God!
Wow! Now, of course, if you were there, you would have bought two of the vaginas. One to keep in the package.
But one of the great heroes, and he was a very, very, very dear friend of mine, who came in at the last minute. We had an actor drop out. That's Lawrence Tierney, and to have Larry in the movie was just so terrific. And we were great, great friends. And I just called him up and I said, "Larry, what do you need there, kid?" "Okay, I'll be down there." And he was.
That's great.
And he was, yeah.
It really was a time, like you said, like independent films, like people could just. It's so different from now,
Totally.
Sean. Today it's like to get a film in a movie theater is really tough, and filmmakers have to do all kinds of things. Where it's you have to do Kickstarter and be internet savvy and try to have a certain presence on Facebook.
But now it's literally, is it the first movie on your streaming queue? That's considered a big victory. I mean, it's
Yeah, it's weird.
I feel like it's come full circle, though, in a lot of ways, that it's like now we're at a place where you can make those movies and get them seen. It's in a different format. It's like before it was direct to videotape. Now it's direct to Netflix.
No, I think that's very true, because there are all these media outlets and there are all these places where the movies can be seen. The big difference is the financial return is completely shifted.
Yeah.
Well, that's true.
And, back in those days, that was when a distributor would actually pay off your production cost in order to have the rights to put the movie out.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And, the American film market and all that stuff. And it was just money raining from the clouds. Mm-hmm. So you were able to make money as an independent producer, and when it went to video and all that, that was just enormous icing on the cake. But of course, now all of that has changed, and part of it is, unfortunately, the ability of absolutely anybody to grab a camera and do a movie and cut it on their laptop and all the rest of it. So every distributor has thousands, and whether it's from YouTube or whatever it is,
but they're also good.
The camera. There's a whole ad campaign to do a film on your phone.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like, hey, we don't need the red camera, or just use your phone.
It's funny. It's like I'll watch some of those movies, and this is what I've thought of when I watched like a lot of older, really schlocky, like 50s movies. And what always gets me is
no such thing.
Yes, you're right. But I get to a place where you'll watch one of these movies and you're like, wow, 50 people showed up to make this.
Yeah.
Like, that's amazing. Yeah. Like, how did you...
And they had to use film, real film in a camera,
Yep.
Yeah. You had to know how to do some things.
And you had to take it to someplace to get processed.
Yeah.
Oh, you bet. No, I mean, that's the thing now when we do commentaries and things on some of the older horror movies I was involved with. And the big question is, why does this look so different? It's because it was shot on 35 millimeter, and it was shot on. I mean, your eye perceives the difference.
Yeah.
And color saturation and all the rest of it. Here, I'll tell you, when we were shooting Offspring and we were down at Roger Corman's studio,
a favorite of mine, by the way.
Offspring.
Well, David Delval was our publicity director. And he did something very smart, because we wanted Vincent to enjoy his experience. So he had Roger and Hazel Court come down.
Hazel Court?
Yes. And they had a mini reunion. So it was just so neat. And he just loved it. But I was standing with Roger, and he was looking at our decaying library set. I think I made this movie about 35 times.
That's about right. Yes. That is an amazing Roger Corman.
Oh, thank you.
Yes,
thank you.
that's very good.
But it's true, like
it doubles for my George Takei.
I think it's a little lower register.
Yes. I try and make adjustments.
Steady cruise at Warp 2.
But, Courtney, like you're saying, how there's so much out there now, it's to stand out from everything now, it just seems like it's harder, for people to latch onto your particular project and for that project to do well with all the other, so much out there. It's like that for everything. I mean, there's so much TV, there's so much movies, there's so much everything. You know what I mean? It wasn't the case.
No, but it's this weird, the other thing that has so completely changed, of course, now is the platform of horror celebrity. That didn't really exist. I mean, back in the days when I or Jeff or whoever it was would get profiled in Fangoria, and we were. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was that was a big deal. And we hit the horror audience, and it was terrific and everything else. But good Lord, now you've got 10,000 websites and what have you, and absolutely everybody has a way to promote themselves, whether it's Facebook or what have you, and everyone's kind of competing for that little nugget of gold, which I always find kind of interesting, because you talk to the guys who are doing, Dread Central wrote about me 75 times. I'm like, did your car get repossessed this morning? No. Oh yeah, but still, I'm an up and coming guy. It's like, come on. This is, and it's just, now we're just at this point where unfortunately more is actually less, if that makes any sense. Yeah.
Well, I would also say though that because there is so much more, that there is still a lot of quality out there, but you got to wade through a lot of crap to find it.
Yeah. You do. It's like self-publishing on Amazon. It's
right.
No, it is, because
that's true.
When I do little talks and things to authors, and I keep telling them, listen, if you want to go the self-publishing route, that's great, because some people have done extremely well, others have not. But I always tell them, you have got to hire an editor to go through your work. And it is the furthest thing from anyone's mind.
Yeah.
And so they go ahead and they post it, and it's just like the movies. It's kind of like there's no filter system.
Right.
And so that's exactly right. You're kind of wading through all this stuff to try and find that one thing. And we don't have the same thing. We don't have a newspaper to look at. We aren't seeing trailers on television, except for, the latest Marvel movie or something, so that something can kind of turn us on and go, yes, I've got to go, down to the Pacific and go see that when it opens, on Friday with, Death Wish 4.
Well, I remember, the fact that I was able to watch a trailer for Laser Blast.
Oh, you bet.
I remember that, man.
I mean, like, wow.
Well, the David Allen animated creatures. That's what got me there.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
It was all kind of like manageable somehow for your brain to take. Like now it's kind of like, where do you start? It's
there was a time where I was sick for a few days, and I tried to go. I think I went through all of Netflix. And I just like, maybe this one will be good. It was like when you would watch MTV and like maybe the next video will be good.
Oh no.
It's not like there weren't always lousy movies. I mean, maybe it's just because now all the catalog of absolutely everything is so available to us,
right
at our fingertips.
It's just like this avalanche. I remember when we were doing the second unit insert shots and the model shots on Puppet Master 3. We were at this tiny studio down on Seward Street in Hollywood, and it was right across from CFI, the lab, CFI Care.
That's right.
And
they can't find it.
That's right.
Studio, yeah.
And
I had some issues there.
Oh, you bet. Well, that's the thing. All the
shop talk.
No, I'm sorry. I had an issue.
But I was talking to one of the old guys over there, and I asked him how many incomplete movies and how many negatives of films that the guys just let go because they couldn't pay their lab bills. Thousands of them.
No.
Going back to the 1930s. I would have
Are you serious?
Absolutely. I would have loved to. Lord knows what happened to that stuff now.
Oh my God, I wonder if it's in vaults or something.
But that would have been just really great to go through
edit that all together.
And see.
No.
Make your own Boyhood.
Yeah, Lord knows what's in there.
Courtney, at the same time, there probably is a lot of crap in there too.
I'm sure.
There might be a kernel. Like,
Sure.
Piece of gold.
Well, I'm going to get back to that the genre though at the time, because slashers were taking over. You had the kind of fantasy horror like Elm Street and Hellraiser, but there's also effects back then. Makeup effects there was a huge boom of that back then too.
Practical effects.
We actually had Stuart Gordon on the podcast talking a little bit about body horror and how the bladder effects and all that kind of like stuff started.
Movies like,
pretty much started with from the Altered States, I think.
Yeah, from like The Thing to like Society.
American Werewolf in London.
Cat People.
Well, a great part of that, of course, not only because the movies were utilizing that stuff, but we mentioned Fangoria. I mean, Fango turned Rob Bottin and Greg Nicotero and Chris Wallace and all those guys into rock stars.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah,
and Famous Monsters did it with Rick Baker at first. And
Absolutely.
Rick Baker became it. I mean, he's the first Academy Award winner of all the makeup stuff.
I mean, you had all those effects in those films, which it became like the whole transformation moment. So
I think also to finally at that point what you could and couldn't do on the stage now was pretty much eliminated. And so many guys had come up experimenting in their garages and their apartments and what have you. So you had all these young guys who were coming in. They were the ones we could afford, or they were going to work for John Buechler, whoever it is, while trying to get their skills together. And everybody wanted to work, and everybody wanted to kind of show off what they were doing. So that was a great boon for low-budget movies, because it's like, oh, listen, I know a great way to turn a guy into a vampire, and it'll cost you 50 cents. Well, of course you're going to do it.
Sure.
Heck, I'd do that.
Sure.
That's
absolutely.
Amazing.
Yeah, and it was because we've said many times on this podcast, we're big fans of practical effects.
Yeah,
this of course is way before CGI, and just seeing like real physical effects in movies like The Thing and From Beyond, and
CGI when it's done right, when it's used to sort of just take the edge off of something, is fine. But there's so many times where my eye, you're talking about when your eye notices something. CGI is something that I always notice is CGI, and it's like, for the most part, like, say, stop motion animation, as much as I love it, it doesn't really scare me. Whereas practical effects always would unnerve me because it seems so real.
Well, of course, the thing is with when you're talking about stop motion, and we've had this discussion, all of us are sitting around, 4:00 in the morning, and we've just waded through the 3 worlds of Gulliver or whatever
right.
it is. And the thing is, though, those Harryhausen miniatures or Willis O'Brien or whoever it is, Pete Peterson or somebody,
Jim
for watching
Danforth,
Jim Danforth, you're watching The Black Scorpion or When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth, whatever it is, they actually existed as a 3-dimensional object in front of a camera lens.
Yeah.
Right.
True.
And that to me is always the difference. I think that's the difference. You get a different emotion from it.
Yeah.
Whereas it's the sense of 3-dimension and water and shadow and all of that is just created by the computer as a digital image. And I do think that even if we're not completely aware of it, I think
your brain catches it.
I think so. Yeah.
Makes a difference.
Oh, I think so. I mean, it makes it, and also too, maybe we're just so geared towards the idea of those images bringing us pleasure because it's a throwback or it's something.
I'm sure there's a quality of that.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's like, don't get me wrong. It's not. I don't like computer graphics. I do when done right, but there's just something so special and so charming and wonderful and engaging for me with anything that's like a practical effect or the stop motion animation.
There's something cool about there's a guy under the table with a pump who is cranking out the blood.
But Matt, wouldn't you agree? I mean, I remember going to see John Carpenter's The Thing when that film
One
came
of my
out,
favorites of all time.
and talk about practical effects. I mean, I'm watching all this.
One of the
crazy,
best,
bizarre
I think, ever
things
done.
happen, and it blew me away. And Matt, I was watching, going, I couldn't figure out how they did that.
Holds up today. Holds up today.
It's still so good.
No, the spider remains just one of the most astonishing
Absolutely.
effects of all time. And it's funny, I was talking about the thing with someone last night, and of course, now our regard for it and just the stunning thing that Carpenter achieved, and he was vilified when that movie came out.
I know.
I remember, I remember when the movie came out. There were like 3 big films that were coming out that weekend, and including E.T. A lot of people don't remember that, but I remember I was so excited about The Thing, and I thought the theater was going to be packed. The theater wasn't packed. I went, oh my god! And when I saw the film, I came out. I thought, oh my god! I feel like I know this big secret that people should go to see this film.
Right.
And I thought it was like the most amazing. I thought this was actually better than Halloween.
Because I watched E.T. and I enjoyed that at the time.
Yeah.
And I watched The Thing and I went, oh, this is great. This is different. This is a horror movie.
Right.
Yes,
And it has a
absolutely.
downbeat ending, and maybe that's how some stories end. Maybe it's kind of like real life. That's cool.
Yeah, I saw E.T. in a packed house on opening night. I saw The Thing in an empty theater that was freezing the day after.
Ooh, it was freezing.
It was freezing. I had the full
Yeah.
effect. But that summer was amazing. The summer of '82.
The summer of '82.
Because the magic summer of '82, you had Poltergeist.
Yep.
You had, I think.
No, great. Okay, no, it's a great film, Matt.
Look,
It sucks.
Let Matt.
It's
let,
horrible.
Matt, let
Not
James
scary.
continue. Let James continue. Just shut your pie hole.
We've been
Just
here
let him-
before. We've been here before. Listen, I think it started with Conan the Barbarian. I think it was the first one to be released that summer, which, for better or worse, what followed, Poltergeist, E.T., Blade Runner, The Thing, Wrath of Khan.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Right.
You also had Creep Show, Cat People.
Creep Show,
and God, you are such.
Come on,
yeah,
Creep
no,
Show's
I
nuts.
love Creep Show.
Show's nuts.
Creep Show.
It was fun. It was fun. It was like it was
There's a
like
couple good
come
moments,
on,
but
guys. It was like watching Night
Creep
of
Show's
no.
where there's
Creep
there's
Show
not a
doesn't
scary
hold-
moment.
it
It's
doesn't
like
hold up that well.
It does not. There's not any point in that movie where it finds the happy medium that it should be at. It's not one thing or another. It's not scary enough. It's not funny enough.
I got to admit, I was a big Romero fan and a big King fan, but Creepshow sort of disappointed me.
I enjoyed it, but not as much as I enjoyed another film that came out in '82, which totally freaked me out.
Interiors?
No,
Was that 82?
No, Basket Case.
Frank Henenlotter, baby.
I mean, this film. I mean, I remember when the film it came actually out to it was an art house, and it was publicized as like being the most.
It is art.
Speaking of midnight screenings, James,
Yeah.
I saw that one at a midnight screening.
Yeah, I think it was a midnight
yeah.
screening that I went to, and I remember, gosh, and the theater was packed, and it was just from the moment it started.
Who owns that basket? I wonder.
Belial something very, very mad.
At the
Yeah.
Smithsonian.
For the listeners who don't know, Basket Case
yeah, that's a
is
poem.
It's a great. It's a very interesting sort of premise.
Yeah.
About this guy and his conjoined twin
Yeah.
that is removed, and the conjoined twin is like this little troll monster.
Well, it's kind of like he was growing and didn't really fully develop.
He's like arms and a head.
Yeah, and so it's figured,
with claws.
And there's this really tragic moment. They decide, okay, the doctors are gonna remove him, and I thought he was gonna go into a little home, but instead, oh my gosh, this is so creepy. Just talking about. So the brother goes out to the trash.
Yeah, that's my favorite part.
And there's this.
That's what the doctors do. They just throw him in the trash,
and it's moving its little arms. And I go, oh, they threw him in the trash.
They don't even check if he's dead.
No, they just throw him in a plastic bag. Do you remember that?
But, yes, I do. And you're bringing up something very, very cool that is completely gone now, and that is the difference between New York movies and L.A. movies. Yeah. Basket Case and Maniac. They were New York movies.
Kind of like
Absolutely.
kind of sleazy quality to them.
Yes.
Now that director, funny you should say sleazy because the director, that's
Frank Henenlotter.
Yeah, and he also did Frankenhooker.
Yes, he did.
Another favorite of mine.
And another Basket Case too.
Two more Basket
And he took over the Something Weird library, didn't he?
He did. I think.
Yeah, I think he did.
Like Rainey. Yeah. I think you're right.
But he was a very clever guy, and talk about independent
created his own universe.
Yeah, like another great filmmaker who also did something very similar. Sam Raimi with Evil Dead.
Absolutely.
I mean, I remember, Courtney. I remember when I first read about this film. It was actually in, I think it was in Starlog magazine, actually, and it had this thing. There's this film made by this young filmmaker, and he's doing all kinds of things where there's forced perspective, stop motion animation, all kinds of effects. And I'm all, oh my gosh, I can't wait for this film. And I waited and I waited and I waited. My understanding is there were like maybe 10 or 15 prints, and they started on the East Coast and would play at a theater for, let's say, 2 or 3 weeks. It slowly worked its way across the country. So when I got it in California, it was like a year later.
Yes.
And I remember seeing that film, and some of it was shot in 16 millimeters, some of it was shot in 35. Some of the acting wasn't the greatest, but they threw
I love this story.
There's so much passion. They threw so much effects and things at the camera. It was like, this is filmmaking,
it was
man.
very
This was
visceral.
really exciting.
I had to go see Evil Dead because remember that fantastic poster with a hand.
Sure.
I have it. I have it.
That's wonderful. And I actually ended up going down to the Los Angeles Theater on Broadway, and I saw it with Up in Smoke. And,
Are you serious?
Absolutely.
Another great horror movie.
Up in Smoke, and I believe Smokey is the Bandit.
Oh my God!
Wait, Smokey is the band?
That was the third one that no one.
I don't remember.
Jackie Gleason played both parts.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. So I'm down.
Kurt Reynolds was in that one.
I sit through those two movies to see Evil Dead.
Oh my God.
And I actually won an Up in Smoke T-shirt, which really pissed off the audience at the Los Angeles Theater that afternoon. Yes.
Wow. And of course, there was that famous quote from Stephen King. I think,
Oh, yes, absolutely.
I've seen the future of horror, and
it is Sam Raimi.
and that really helped a lot.
I was
It's
a fan of
movie.
Sam Raimi ever since.
Yep.
No,
that's speaking of, I mean, talking about someone who kind of ruled horror in the 80s, Stephen King.
Oh,
Had
yeah.
so many adaptations.
Oh, my gosh, you're
Let me just
right.
read you. These were all released in the 80s.
Okay.
The Shining,
Uh-huh.
Christine, Firestarter, Children of the
Sucks.
Corn, The Dead
Sucks.
Zone, Creep Show, Cujo, Cat's Eye, Silver Bullet, Maximum Overdrive, Pet Sematary, Stand By Me, The Running Man, all from the 80s.
And that's not even counting the TV adaptation.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of that, of course, is the product with King's deal with Dino De Laurentiis. So, literally half of those movies are De Laurentiis films.
Right.
And I worked quite closely with Mark Lester for years. I wrote a lot of movies he directed. And
Class of 1984. Come on.
yes, I did. 1999. I did the.
I love that one. That's a great
thank
one.
you. Thank
Pam
you.
Greer and
That's
yeah,
what
that's-
John
that's
P.
a
Ryan.
fantastic
Sure,
one.
yeah. But that was the thing. And in fact, Stanley Mann was the associate producer on that movie. So I talked to him quite a bit about Firestarter and what have you. And, it's weird that Firestarter ultimately, didn't end up being a particularly good movie.
No.
Because they treated it like an action movie, which was Mark's training. And I think that was just kind of the way it went.
Right.
But it wasn't, to me, any worse than a lot of the other Dino stuff that was being done from King's
Well,
Brothers.
wouldn't you agree?
None of of them just didn't ever seem to really
I mean,
click.
Dead Zone was Dino, and that was really good.
That was terrific because of
that's
David
Cronenberg.
Cronenberg. Yeah.
But wouldn't you agree that I mean, everyone that I talk to who has read Stephen King's books, I always go, oh, well, the book is so much better. The book is so much better. But it's hard to put everything in the book into a movie. And then there are, like, I saw Christine, and I really enjoyed Christine. It's
fun.
It's fun.
It's a much funner book than a movie, I think.
Is it?
Yeah.
I enjoyed the movie, but yeah, I mean, it's at least it captures the flavor of the book.
It does, yeah.
And where I'd also argue that The Shining, where it takes so many different avenues away from the book, really does capture the horrific flavor of the book.
Well, Firestarter is a prime example of, being faithful to the source material does not make a better movie.
Right.
No, I agree.
Right.
But the thing is, I think with The Shining, and I've revisited the movie a number of times. I was disappointed when I saw it. I couldn't.
Was it Scatman Crothers? Was that?
Oh no, love Scatman.
See,
Ooh.
me too. Me too. Some of my friends and colleagues disagree with me, but
I actually, when I worked at the Shrine Auditorium, I parked Scatman Crothers' car, and I told him, and I said, "Oh, Scat," I said, "I love you." I said, "Man, tell me about working on The Shining." And never
you start crying,
and he goes, "No," he goes, "No," he goes, "Stanley is my man, but he doesn't shoot as fast as Clint." that was Scat's.
You got to remember that The Shining now is a classic, but in 1980 it was not all that universally well received.
Right. I was when I first saw it, I was shocked because I had just read the book, and it was very different than the book. And just the character of Jack Torrance is so different, but it was so scary in the way that it was shot and the tone, the atmosphere.
Well, a lot of people have always said that perhaps the problem is ultimately, in a lot of ways, was, Kubrick would kind of take that distance sometimes from his material, and by not completely engaging, because he was so brilliant, but was this something that ever really turned him on? Is the question, and I don't know that it ever really did. And also, too, I mean, it's become this iconic performance. But I always thought, we know we're waiting for Nicholson to do his thing.
That is true. Yeah, but it's also like, for me, that movie it's like one of those movies where you know how it's going to end, and it's going to be a happy ending, but you want that happy ending.
Yes.
And this was the unhappy ending that I wanted. It was like, because also Shelley Duvall's character is so fucking annoying. Yeah. Like, get her, Jack.
But there's still so much. I mean, good Lord, still some of the imagery, even for people who don't like the movie, the little
like
girls
a painting.
and all the rest of it. It's absolutely the thing that everyone remembers.
And what he's so great at is making that house the villain.
Oh yes, very much so.
The atmosphere, and the set design, the photography, everything.
Also, too, like, as far as not just like the body horror and effects, you had a lot of outright monster films.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the influence of Ridley Scott's Alien and Cameron's Aliens, you had a lot of maybe derivative, but you had a lot of like Alien and The Thing kind of rip-offs or homages too. I mean, you had movies like Roger Corman himself. I mean, Galaxy of Terror, Forbidden World.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Andrew Stevens with a blowtorch and a hand grenade.
right.
And that's just now.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But you had weird ones too, like in Seminoid.
Seminoid, you bet.
Yeah, which was a British
Extra.
production. Yeah, Extra.
Oh my gosh, I remember Extra.
I love Extra.
I have that poster. This was
Norman Thaddeus Vane. Extra. You bet.
It's so it's so ridiculous, and yet I love every minute.
There's a for listeners. I mean, the alien in this film. I guess the director thought, I don't know if it came from the director, but let's have this alien walk in a completely different, unique way.
Yes.
And basically, what it is a guy walking on all fours,
but
with the head in the back
of his head. So
it was great.
And I remember when when I saw it for the first, I actually started laughing, really. But it still looked
cool. The birth scene is it for Extra. The birth scene.
A woman gives birth to a full-grown man.
Yes.
Monster. You don't see that every day.
If only that could happen in real life.
But that's the thing. We're not going to. But nowadays we're not going to be able to go see Blue Monkey at the movie theater.
I love Blue Monkey.
Oh my God.
Crazy Canadian with Steve Railsback.
That's it.
Canadian feature.
Yeah, John Vernon, of course.
Oh my God! And it's
playing Dean Warner and everything.
Yeah. The weirdest movie though. It's like it's not a monkey. It's like a giant praying mantis alien that infects people in a hospital. Like. It's fantastic.
Well, I mean, talking about like crazy films. I mean, there's also the Reanimator, which is also very. I mean, Stuart Gordon, who was on our show,
fantastic. Yeah, really.
And great. Just
outrageous,
totally outrageous.
Yeah, no, it's great stuff. I mean, you also had the kind of the offshoot of the seaworthy alien films because like there was The Abyss, there was Alien, then you had like Deep Star 6 and Leviathan, which
Leviathan,
are like monsters, in the deep. So there was like a good monster film.
I went with a friend to go see Leviathan, and it was actually a theater in Hollywood Boulevard. You know when you have that divine moment where you're sitting there in your theater and you go, okay, is that vomit? Is it urine? Is it a rotting corpse? No, it's all three. So our Leviathan experience was cut a little short just to get back out into the oxygen.
Smell-o-vision.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Oh,
wow.
Man.
And of course, this is also the decade where a new rating system was created.
Absolutely.
Because of Steven Spielberg.
That's right.
Two movies which came out in 1984.
Yeah.
Gremlins and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom were too strong to be PG, and it was really, I think it was Spielberg's influence with Jack Valenti, right?
To go PG-13, but PG-13 sucks. It really does. But no, come on, guys, we grew up with M.
I know.
M meant something.
But see,
the Bullet was rated M.
The thing that I thought was really stupid was with Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Really, there's like two moments in that film. Which it's like I guess if Spielberg said, "Oh well, I have to show this moment where the hand goes into the guy's
chest,
like a
and native ritual, and the guy's heart gets
beating hard,"
right.
And then there's like the monkey head, the little brain.
They're supposed to eat the monkey brains.
And I'm thinking, you don't have to show that. You could
yes,
still
you do.
No, but to keep it like a PG.
But hey, remember the
people
day
were pissed off, Matt. People were pissed off at that.
Tougher.
Way back when. Remember the 70s?
Yeah, remember the 60s? Remember Planet of the Apes?
Yes.
When that was G and people were getting shot in the throat?
No, that's what I'm saying. That's when it meant something. The vampire lovers, we had naked girls all over the place. I mean, that was
good times.
Awesome. Yeah, we just turned into,
and we turned out okay.
By the way, I misspoke. And just so everybody, I don't have the IMDb in front of me.
That's okay.
Actually, we mentioned Extra. That was Harry Bromley Davenport. Yes, I made a mistake.
And you know what, Courtney? That's what I like about you. If we make a mistake here on Monster Party,
it's fine.
It's okay. Well, it's
you
like if we catch, because it happens all the time.
But
Matt will say something.
You're not even drinking that much.
No, Matt will say something, and I will correct him, and he goes, "I admit it. I made a mistake." It happens all the time.
And I correct him about all his opinions,
which are all right.
But the other director you mentioned did direct some other Norman Thaddeus Vane.
He did. What was that terrific? He did that movie about the with Ferdy Mayne as the horror star and Jennifer Starrett.
Frightmare.
Frightmare. Jeff Combs is in it too.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, that's right.
You guys are good.
Yes.
Yeah.
What's the guy's name again?
Norman Thaddeus Vane.
Thaddeus.
I used to see.
If I ever went on the lam, that would be my name.
Very nice man, but I used to always see him at the AFM. He always had kind of spilled food on his jacket. But very nice man. Very sweet.
He's living well.
Yes.
Speaking, we talked about Gremlins. Then we have to also talk about all the Gremlins ripoffs that came out in the 80s.
Oh my gosh!
You had Critters, you had Ghoulies, you had Troll, you had Hobgoblins, you had the Munchies.
Oh my God, the Munchies! You bet, sure.
Sean, I totally forgot about that.
And what about
Munchies?
And what about Newsies?
Remember? No. That is not. No,
they weren't creatures.
First of all, you're in the wrong decade.
Horrible monsters that sold papers against people's will.
No, it wasn't in the 80s.
All right, you want your Newsies story?
I do.
Newsies was actually shooting on the Universal backlot when we were doing Puppet Master 3. So we were
See, it all comes together.
It all comes together. That's right. Yes.
Wow. Now
6 degrees from Puppet Master.
That's it.
Yes. So that's a nice little good segue to go into your time with Charles Band and Empire, and tell us a little bit about that whole
and
how you got involved with that whole world.
How did you get involved?
Oh well, it's quite a quite a saga. It was a friend of mine from college named Mike Farkas had me. He was trying to get some movies together. He had a film degree, and he actually had me write a treatment for him about a futuristic prison. His dad had been one of the primary investors in a movie called Hell Night, starring Linda Blair.
Right, we know it well.
Love it.
Yeah, produced by Irwin Yablans and Bruce Cohn Curtis, and Tom DeSimone directed it. And Mike got a job working for Irwin and Bruce. Irwin had a project that when he was over at Lorimar called Horror in the Big House, and he decided he wanted to do Halloween in a prison. Okay. Mike recommended me to him. Oh. And I had written a screenplay called The Night Crawlers about vampires in L.A. that nothing ever happened. In fact, Jeff and I tried to get it set up a few times, and we never could do it. But I used that as my writing sample, and I went in, and Irwin and Bruce read it, and Bruce endorsed me, and so I was hired to write Prison. And the first thing we did is we looked at the script, and I said, Irwin, this really doesn't, excuse me, Mr. Your Blondes, but it was Irwin. Said, this really doesn't make exactly. This really doesn't make any sense because you've got guys in a prison afraid of a guy with a knife. Everybody has a knife. What is this? And he agreed. So I said, it has to be Poltergeist Goes to Jail. And that's where we started. And Rennie Harlan had directed a movie that was making kind of a big splash in the American film market called Born American. Uh-huh. And
Rennie Harlan, yeah.
Yeah, Rennie had been hired.
He's big.
And so we met. And we decided we went to work together. In fact, Rennie and I ended up sharing a house. We moved in together.
Whatever you do, whatever you do in your private life is fine.
Wait,
we don't judge.
Wait, was Gina Davis involved?
No, not yet.
Because
no,
I think she's. I mean,
I always
this day.
No,
yes.
Rennie did quite well. I always say he got the girls. I got to make the breakfast. That's but that was the whole. And then we started to work. And the thing was, at one point, Prison was going to be made over Canon. And Irwin and Bruce were still the producers, and the development exec, oh boy, I'm trying to remember his name. Really nice fellow. He wrote Raw Deal, the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, and then they found him dead in Las Vegas, remember?
Right,
yes.
Yeah.
He was the executive over there who was going to do it. And actually, it was Dino De Laurentiis. And it was De Laurentiis with Menachem, I guess. And anyway, it didn't happen. And Irwin decided that he and Bruce were going to split as partners, and he wanted to hold on to Prison. Bruce held on to his other properties, and they were fine, and Bruce made his movies. And Irwin, though, had distributed a couple of Charlie Band's movies, including Parasite.
Oh, Parasite. I remember that one.
Demi Moore.
And so,
3D, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And so he went, and I was actually a PA on that thing for one day, ironically enough. And so he made the deal with Charlie, but it was strictly to supply, it was supplying finance and everything else, and Irwin had brought in outside money. So we were kind of out of the gate at like a higher echelon just because we weren't constricted by the normal budgets Charlie was using at that time. So we were very lucky. It was like Reanimator and everything else, and we shot in a prison there in Rollins, Wyoming, and we had Mac Ahlberg as the DP, and of course Viggo Mortensen starring in it.
Yeah, it's a good cast.
Oh my
God. Good cast.
Early Viggo Mortensen.
The early days.
Yeah,
wow.
he was great. He was great.
Lane Smith.
Yeah.
Oh,
Lane Smith was such a great guy, but we went through so many people to see about playing the warden. John Cassavetes came in.
Oh, what?
And he did. And he and Irwin were old friends, but, he had a little bit of the drinking thing, and they couldn't insure him.
Oh.
And I think he actually...
Much like this show.
Yes. I think Cassavetes actually, he died of cirrhosis of the liver.
Oh,
and so that was a shame. But this was like... Robert Culp comes in.
Oh. Okay. I love Robert Culp.
I'm all about
pot calling kettle.
Yes, I'm all about Bob Culp. So he comes in, and of course he's 15 feet high, plus his hair is another 10 feet.
I love
just the most intimidating guy in the world. And I'm sitting there going, "Oh, this is so cool, Robert Culp." And he looks down at me. I'll try to do this for you. He goes, "So you wrote this screenplay?" And I'm like, "Yes, sir, I surely did, and we sure do want you in it." And he stared at me. It probably was about 3 seconds, but it felt like a half an hour. "Interesting. And that was my entire Robert Culp interaction. But we had a lot of cool. Barry Newman came in to talk about being in it. So did Tony LoBianco, who was a jerk off.
You are like, you are like my Rich Little. You are like, you know, impressions of everybody I love.
It was great, and Lane ended up because Lane had just done the Nixon miniseries.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
right.
The 100 Days.
He ended up on V after a while too.
Yes, he did.
TV series.
And he was just the greatest guy. He really was terrific. And, Tom Lister, Tiny Lister, was in there. And I remember at the cast reading, I was sitting next to Tom. He was sitting on the floor. I mean, he was a giant guy. And he racked his head back and hit it against the corner of a desk that had one of those glass, layers on top of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this thing went right into his skull. And there's like blood going down his shirt. And I'm like, Tom, are you all right? I had to reach up here. I go, Tom, are you all right? I'm fine. It's like
just a table in my head.
Absolutely didn't feel a thing. But we were so lucky, and Chelsea Field was terrific, and Tom Everett, and we just had a really top notch group of actors in it.
Prison is
Larry
really
Jenkins.
Fun. It's a fun, fast paced, effects filled horror film. It's really good. It's a great '80s horror film.
Well, thank you. And Rennie and I were living together then, and so we just kept saying we want this to be Riot in Cell Block 11, and the fact that it is also with a supernatural element. Yeah, that was really what we were aiming for. And he did a great job. And of course, Matt Goldberg was just terrific. And also, I think Richard Band, that's one of Richard's favorite scores. And I really think it was so cool because he just brought this whole new approach to the music than his normal, because Charlie kind of liked the big orchestra type thing, and Richard went for something I think was a lot more minimalist and it looked like, very interesting.
I'm guessing too that it looks like a bigger budget than you had. It looks good. It looks like
oh yeah, and we had a long shooting schedule. I'll tell you, there was a Irwin's son is in the movie, Mickey. And he plays the young inmate who is in with the giant guy who says, "I'm going to be your friend," and all this stuff. Okay. That actor, whose name now escapes me, was actually in prison at the time for second-degree murder. He was the actual federal penitentiary at Rollins was just down the road, because we were shooting where we were was the old territorial prison that had not been closed until the 70s, or maybe even the 80s. And of course, when the thing was built in the 1800s, the average height of most men was like 5'5".
Huh.
So here are all these guys who are 6'9" being jammed into these cells. And, finally the state closed it down, but it remained because it was a big Western landmark. This fellow had his SAG card. He had been a stuntman on Centennial, which was shot in Wyoming, had gotten into a fight in a bar, and had hit a guy with a bottle, and he died.
Oh.
So here was this prisoner at, because we wanted extras, but here was this prisoner at this pen still serving out his murder term, and he had his SAG card, so that's how he ended up in the movie. And when the cameras were not turning, there was an armed guard with him at all times, and he was shackled his wrists and his ankles.
Wow.
Yep.
You can't get any more real than that.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
And he's good
really
in the movie,
authentic,
too.
yeah.
I gave him a lot of lines.
They used to do that to Peter O'Toole.
Yes.
I think you don't realize that.
Wow. Yes. Well, speaking of extras, Courtney, before the show, you were talking to us a little bit about your growing up in Pennsylvania and in Pittsburgh, and you were a zombie extra in Romero's Dawn of the Dead.
Yes, I was.
No.
Yes,
Can
I
you tell
was.
us a little bit about that?
I'm actually trying to remember how that came about. I remember, it was like an open thing.
Uh-huh.
They were shooting down at the Monroeville Mall in the middle of winter, and it was incredibly cold. And the snow was everywhere, and they were just it was kind of like, hey, come and be in a movie, but it was getting more and more difficult for people to travel and everything else to get down there. So I got hired, and I played and I brought some friends along with me, and we were zombies in the attack on J.C. Penney's. Yeah. And my father was a cardiologist, so I wore one of his lab coats, and they gave me a nurse who was pulling a toaster behind her.
She's pulling a toaster?
She's pulling a toaster for something she brought.
I vaguely remember that.
Yeah. And so I shot there, and then they had the problem again because they kept losing people, fewer and fewer people. So they asked me to come back the next day and they put me in a flak jacket, and I was a zombie trying to grab the helicopter pilot.
Okay.
You know.
Yeah. I remember that.
Yeah,
Okay.
but they had to double up on everyone. I remember Richard Rubenstein was in there with the gray makeup, slopping it on everybody, and it was great fun. Now, this was my screw up. There was a special effects man on the movie named Gary Zeller, who was he was a top-notch guy. And he had worked on The Godfather and all of this stuff. But things were getting very short-handed, and we started talking. He said, look, would you just give me a hand? Because everybody was just pitching in all over the place.
Right.
So he actually let me rig the bullet hit box. And I did. And he checked it. But I mean, look, I didn't. No, he was fine. And he was great. He said, yep, let's go ahead. And I think that, this would work. Anyway, when we plugged it in, about 5 bullet hits went off prematurely. Because of short circuit.
Okay.
Wow. And, which at that point, I mean, it wasn't like anybody was inefficient. It was just that, the production was kind of running out of gas. And again, they were so short-handed.
Yeah.
And that's not really your fault.
No, but he was great.
Courtney!
He was great.
The Jerry Lewis of the set.
The upshot was there was a reporter on the set from Rolling Stone. Oh. And she got splattered with blood.
Oh. No way.
That's cool. And if you've seen the article about Dawn of the Dead, she talks about this. And apparently she just loved it. She thought it was, how perfect that she gets it. Okay. So, and it was fine. And, Gary was very nice about it. He said, don't worry about it. We'll just reset and everything. We did it in 5 minutes. Everything was fine.
You're like a part of history.
Well,
Yeah.
Here was the thing. Years later, I run onto George Romero. We have a very nice chat, and we had some friends in common, of course, from Pittsburgh and everything else. And I thought, this will be a great anecdote. I'll say, George, do you remember when the bullet hits went off? And he looked at me like he wanted to kill me.
Really?
Yes.
Really?
And he goes, that was you? Oh my God. I just, shrunk down. So I was like, oh my God. So I just felt terrible about that. But still, I was in Dawn of the Dead, even though.
So we'll see you in the flak jacket if we look for you?
Yes, you should. Yes.
Awesome.
And also, I'm in the parking lot. We were wandering around out there, a whole bunch of us. And but again, they just had everybody, doubling and tripling up. Wow. Because it was just harder and harder to get folks out there.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, speaking of your Empire work, also I want to talk about. You can't really talk about Empire Pictures and Charles Band without talking about the brief revival of 3D.
Yes.
Yes, indeed.
He had some of the big studios, of course. Friday the 13th Part 3, Jaws 3D.
Absolutely.
Amityville 3D.
That's right.
But then also you had
Interiors 3D.
No, there was no Interiors 3D.
That was awesome.
Metal Storm: The Destruction of Jared Sin.
Well, that was really the big one because Parasite had done very well, and Compass had distributed that, but that was the thing. Charlie working. I think did Mac shoot Metal Storm? I think he did. I'm sure he did. And Mac really, he was such an astonishingly good cinematographer and just took to 3D like a fish to water and did such a beautiful job. And that was a big thing because here was an independent producer coming in to make a 3D science fiction movie for a price for a major studio. And, Richard got to have a full orchestra, a real orchestra and everything because Universal was paying for the movie.
And it's one of my favorite titles of all time.
Oh, yes.
Metal Storm, The Destruction of Jared Sin.
Like you're supposed to know who
we should know who Jared Sin was.
Jared Sin, yes, what a Metal Storm
Hey, remember
is.
Jared Sin?
Yes.
You'll never guess what happened to him.
Wasn't there another one?
He got destroyed.
Yes. Yes.
Was there one Space Hunter?
Space Hunter.
Space Hunter. Yes.
Wasn't that with Molly Ringwald?
Molly Ringwald in 3D and Peter Strauss.
And Michael Ironside.
Yes.
Michael Ironside.
Michael Ironside.
Overdog.
Yes.
I have as the Overdog. That's right. I have that poster.
And I think didn't all of this kind of come out of there was that foreign film called Comin' At Ya, which was a Western.
That was the Western.
It was like a surprise hit. It was this cheesy, Western 3D like Euro film, right?
Yep.
And it became a big hit. And they also made Treasure of the Four Crowns.
Treasure of the Four
which
Crowns.
is kind of like the Raiders ripoff. And that spurred a whole 3D thing started.
Coming At You just absolutely exploded. You remember the great shot of the baby's butt coming right down on you? They're putting it in the bathtub. Yeah, it's like,
I remember Cinefantastic did a whole thing on that. I remember it was on the cover or something.
And then Molly Ringwald in 3D kind of stopped the whole 3D.
No, it had nothing to do with Molly Ringwald.
That's what I heard.
No, you heard wrong.
We're talking about one summer, right? We're talking about 1983, and that was it.
It was 82 and 83 is where kind of, and then they all stopped, really, right?
That was it. But also, too, they were taking the 3D process, of course, that Andy Warhol had used, and that the porn guys had used for a while, with 3D stewardesses and all that type of stuff. And there you go. And then, but it was a cheap process, which was the big thing.
And I think really after seeing through Jaws 3D, I think that could have pretty much put a nail in the coffin right there.
Jaws 3D jumped the shark.
Oh my God, that was it really did. The shark jumped the shark.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're right there. Yeah, right. But that was another kind of.
Yeah, but we got to see Dennis Quaid fall in love with one of his wives. That's nice.
That's true.
I'm trying to find something.
Remember when they were happy? Yes, it was a different time.
Yes.
Who was that blonde actress? What was
Bess Armstrong?
Bess Armstrong.
Yeah. Well, Courtney, is there any kind of a kind of an 80s sci-fi or horror film from that decade that is kind of a favorite of yours, is kind of overlooked and not many people talk about? I mean, there were quite a lot back then, but is there one that kind of like doesn't get enough attention, you think, that you like?
Well, and I'm going to mention a movie that, of course, I think what has happened is the complete obscuring of the first Nightmare on Elm Street is terrible. People have almost totally forgotten that original movie, not only because of the incredible number of sequels, including the one Rennie did, but now it's been remade, and it's like this film gets pushed so far back in its own history, it's like it doesn't even exist.
Mm-hmm. It is amazing.
And it's an incredibly good movie, and it's still incredibly effective, but nobody goes back to it. And I don't understand. That. It's just like its own success crushed it.
They just remember all the wisecracks and the sequels and stuff.
I mean, by the time we had toys, in Toys R Us, it really, now he was sort of a caricature of himself, as opposed to that first movie where he is genuinely the thing of your nightmares.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And also too, we were talking about the period when Cronenberg really started to push forward Videodrome and and The Brood, absolutely. And these are the movies you would go see on a triple feature. I remember I saw The Brood with The Gates of Hell and Mortuary. So that was
nice.
Well, I saw. I think we said this on the last podcast, but I saw They Came From Within with my mom accidentally.
There you go.
Awkward. Yeah.
Actually, I saw They Came From Within with Straight Time with Dustin Hoffman.
Oh, wow.
So, wow. Those were the days, yes.
We got to do a podcast on just weird double features.
Yes.
And we could probably just keep talking. I mean, the topic is the 80s, and there are so many hundreds, thousands of films that we haven't even touched upon.
There's also a lot of 80s films that were very 80s subjects. Like, you had like Death Spa.
Oh yes,
Death Spa was a very 80s movie. Took place like in a workout facility with it was kind
of
gotta
have the spandex and the hand.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
Right.
Well, and you worked on Puppet Master 3. I mean, that whole series I'm very fond of, and those characters are so unique and strange and lovable at the same time.
I hadn't done anything for Charlie in a number of years because I was off doing other things, and a friend of mine actually was going down to Full Moon for an audition, and I just tagged along. And I saw Albert, and I saw Charlie, and we had a lovely reunion and what have you. And then he called me up and asked me if I'd be interested in writing this third Puppet Master movie. And I was like, well, and I was a little back and forth. But he wanted it to be a prequel to the first movie. He wanted it to be a period piece, and Charlie kind of knows me well enough to know that was the big hook. And I just came in, I said, this could be great. And this was literally my quote, and said, this will be the Where Eagles Dare of Puppet Master. Absolutely no idea what I was talking about, but Dave Dakota, I think he did a great job on it. And the thing was that movie actually was going to be one of the first of the Full Moon movies to be shot in Romania. And the deal didn't go through because I think Ted had already done one of the Netherworlds, or I think he had just come back from doing it. So the film was being prepped. Paramount was behind us and everything else and giving us a little financial wiggle room. So David and John Schuweiler went out and they made the deal for us to shoot at Universal.
Really?
And it was fantastic. We were there at at All Quiet on the Western Front Village, which is Frankenstein Village.
For you, it must have been great.
It was my gosh! Every time I'm like, Lon Chaney Jr. had a hangover here. This is great. It was fantastic.
Didn't Lon Chaney have a hangover over there?
No, I don't want to start Lon Jr. bashing because I love him. He's my hero. But it was just wonderful, and we probably had more visitors on the set than at any other time. But
it's such a great movie. I really do. I enjoy that movie. I like you. I'm a sucker for the prequel, and I thought that was a great way to go with that.
Yeah.
But it's just a lot of fun, and those characters are
thank you. And
so
we were so lucky because Walter Gotell and everybody was in the thing, and it was so great. And I remember with David Allen and his crew, because we were talking about some of the effects, because of course there was going to be some stop motion. And the thing with Six Shooter crawling up the side of the bordello, and I said, this looking down is the Zanti Misfits shot.
Yes.
No, they totally got what I was talking about, and there we go.
I love nerd shorthand.
The thing was, Six Shooter originally was part of conceptualization for another one of Charlie's movies, and I can't remember if it was one of the Puppet Master sequels or not, but he was like a black metal robot.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow.
And I said, well, Charlie, we need to turn him into a cowboy because he has to be a symbol of the United States. This is before we got involved with World War II and kind of the Axis enemy and all that stuff. And they let me do that, which I was very glad about. But when we were casting the movie, it just kind of goes to show you, Dave Dakota, I just loaded Dave down with Night of the Generals and all these movies. So we decided, yes, this is going to be Pinewood Nazis. This is what we wanted to have. And so he totally got into it. And so we ended up with this wonderful cast of British and European actors. And we're both such hammer nuts. We really wanted Ralph Bates to play the Gestapo officer who, in fact, turns into Blade. Mm-hmm. And now I'd actually worked for a while with Herbert Lom. I'd helped him edit a book. He was great. He was such a great guy. And, I asked him to be in the thing. He goes, well, Courtney, I think your entire budget, not quite up to my usual salary. So when that ended,
how much are you going to be paid? And then the eyes started fluttering.
But we decided we really wanted to try for Ralph Bates. And so our casting directors went ahead and they made the offer to him in England. And nothing happened. And we finally get a phone call one day at the office, and it was from Virginia Wetherill. I thought, Virginia Wetherill from the Crimson Cult? And they go, yes. We get on the phone. I didn't know. It was his wife and now his widow. He was passing away from cancer when we had offered him the movie, but he knew he had been offered the film. Oh, wow. And she thanked us, and it was just, it was so lovely. It's so nice. Wonderful. And Christopher Neame, I remember, came in later that day. And, of course, he had been in Dracula AD 72 and all this. And he was one of Ralph's closest friends. And he said, look, if you cast me in this, I'm going to give my entire salary to Virginia. She had told him the whole story. It was just fantastic. And I thought, guys, I love him. I think he's just a fascinating looking guy. He looks kind of like him. He's this huge man, but he's got that cat face. He's just wonderful. But Charlie that's where, you do have to go with your executive producer. And he said, no, we really can't do that because we have so many European actors in this movie. Distributors will think the film was made overseas, and I can't have that, and they will cut the price. Wow. So Richard Lynch, and of course Richard was great, and he looks exactly like the Blade puppet. So it was absolutely perfect. Right. And Richard was a great guy.
Awesome character.
Great guy, very nice man, and it worked out just great. But that was our little saga.
And Six Shooter. It's funny that we're talking about this because I just had my sister-in-law and her kids visit us, and I was explaining Puppet Master to them, and they saw a little six-shooter of mine, and they're like, well, how would he hurt people? Because the bullets are so small. Wouldn't you just jump out of the way? And I had a long intellectual discussion of like, no, he shoots a lot of them, and he runs after you.
Yes. And if you're a Gestapo officer who's just been laid, you're going to be a little slow on the draw. So that helps.
I left that part out.
Yeah.
Courtney, I want to ask you too, though. What you've touched on a lot of like kind of how the 80s were back then. These films. What do you think changed? because the 80s were a very unique time for horror and sci-fi, these genres, but what as the 90s grew closer and into the 2000s, but like what changed? What made it different?
I mean, really, it just came down to this. The bubble burst. The home video market completely changed its financial structure. Mm-hmm. And first of all, people were buying rather than renting.
Yeah, VHS collecting then became
VHS collecting went right out the window. Suddenly you had DVD. It was a higher quality. It was cheaper. And even that, of course, has been replaced by streaming and all the rest of it. And the businesses, Blockbuster and all the rest of it that supported this. And, the outlet for this material, suddenly they're gone. And look now, when even a movie plays in the movie theater, look how small the window is before it's available to see it.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Sometimes simultaneously.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
More and more.
Yeah. It's just, so when all of that happened, it was like what the individual companies were going to pay for their product completely shifted. And of course, TWE and Embassy and all these companies,
Canon Films,
absolutely Canon and all of these companies that thrived on that income, it was suddenly yanked away from them, and so of course they shuttered their doors.
Right.
It's kind of sad, Sean.
It's a sad end of an era.
It is.
But one that is fondly remembered.
Yes.
And what's great now is like this stuff is coming out on, like I said, I have the Blu-ray for Prison. It's out with all these.
And it looks fantastic.
It's fantastic. All the Puppet Master, all the Charles Band stuff, like all the stuff is now at least available, and hopefully for newer generations who weren't around to appreciate
the movies. The way Charlie is doing those Blu-rays, when David and I sat down and did the commentary on Puppet Master, I was just knocked right out of my chair. It looked gorgeous. So who's ever doing this stuff they're just doing an absolutely top flight job. And I think Rennie and I were talking after we did some of the commentaries and stuff on Prison, and we all just agreed that the saddest thing is that Mac didn't live long enough to see the movie presented in this way, because he was a tremendously good cameraman, but wow, it just looks just great.
Yeah.
And I also want to give a big shout out to Dr. Mordrid.
Oh, good Lord.
Oh, yeah.
Jeff Combs, and then that story, and I just loved that movie. And it's like it was the Doctor Strange movie we never got.
Right.
Well, the origin of Dr. Mordrid was kind of an interesting thing. Jack Kirby was actually developing projects for Charlie Band.
Oh, wow.
And one of the projects he developed was called Dr. Mortalis. And I think I don't remember if Charlie had actually tried to acquire Doctor Strange or not. But remember, this was during the period when Marvel had declared bankruptcy, and they were in all that stuff. And so there was all this change. I don't even know if Stan Lee wasn't even involved with the company at that point. And so all these things were going on, and Charlie wasn't able to close the deal, I suppose. But he did have Jack working on these projects, and Jack came up with this thing. And so then they turned it over to me, and Kirby had some just wonderful concept sketches. And one of the great things, I think David Allen and his guys did just such a great job. There's a shot of the asteroid planet, because I just came up with a thing out of whole cloth, but using obviously my Marvel mania, as my basis for what I was writing. But remember that there's that wonderful shot of the prison planet where you kind of see the asteroid at a distance, everything. I swear to God, it's like that looks like Jack Kirby inked by Vince Colletta in a panel from Thor.
Yes, yeah.
It was just, and they just so captured that. I thought it was just absolutely wonderful, and I love Jeff in it, and it was so great. And also too, that was my first time really, really working closely with Albert Band, and he was just a champion to me. I loved Albert. He considered me kind of his protege, and I was awfully glad of that, because he was just a great guy. And when I would talk to Albert, that's the thing. I was talking to the guy that wrote the screenplay to the John Huston Red Badge of Courage. This is he had an amazing history. He was the associate producer on The Asphalt Jungle.
Wow.
And so that's the thing. I mean, we would talk about those movies, not Ghoulies 2. And so I guess he appreciated that. But I think he did a wonderful job on the film, and Adolfo Bartoli, of course, shot it. And I was getting ready to direct Trancers when Dr. Mordrid was being made. And Mordrid was shot out at Stephen Cannell's old studio out by the airport where they used to do Hunter. And what he would do is Charlie would take me, and he was so generous, and so were Albert. And they say, okay, this is going to be our shot. what do you think? Or do you want to change it? So they kind of put me in the driver's seat while they were making the movie, so I'd get familiar with the entire crew. I would get to know everyone in a different way than just as someone who had written a script. And it was a wonderful easing in process.
Yeah.
They were really great about that.
That's cool.
Wow. Courtney, anything you're working on now that you want to kind of plug or mention?
Well, I've been writing a lot of fiction lately, and I have created a Western book series called Shotgun for Pinnacle Books, which did well as mass market and also as a hardcover. And the sequel, Shotgun 2: The Bleeding Ground, comes out next October. Oh. Yes, and also too. I wrote. Well, we will see. We will see what it goes. But it looks like I'm going to be working with Tiger Aspect, the fellows that do Ripper Street and Peaky Blinders. They just picked up a property of mine, so
great.
I'll be over there doing a big old adventure series, and I also wrote a New Adventures of Captain Nemo novel for Tor Forge. So that'll be coming out.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So it's kind of fun. I mean, I kind of shifted gears a little bit.
And you do a lot of Blu-ray commentaries as well, like DVD commentaries.
Oh yeah, especially for westerns, because I love to gab.
It's amazing you find the time to do all this stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's the thing is, I'm always I think just one of these. I mean, we're all just so enthusiastic about the movies, and sometimes you get a little, it's like, oh my god, I was doing a movie with Mark Lester and James Remar was in it. That ended up being an interesting adventure. But the thing was, I was like, and I never ask actors I'm working with to sign anything, really, because I think it's kind of cheesy.
I tell you.
Although I've done it, sometimes you catch up with them later. But I had this great lobby card from the Cotton Club.
Yeah.
And I go to Jim Remar and I said, Jim, will you sign this? It was awesome. He goes, I can't sign this. I'm like, oh, no. Why not? No, I'd never be able to sign this. I'm like, God, why not? I felt so bad. And he goes, I don't have a pen. Okay. Well, we can take care of that. So, yes. But he was so intimidating. I didn't know what the problem was. But yes.
Courtney, you have been awesome. Thank you so much. I hope that you'll come back again.
Oh, well, thank you.
So many great stories.
Yeah, a wealth of knowledge.
We've covered the 80s, and now we have to come back to cover the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s.
But see, Sean, that's the funny thing. I mean, you said we covered it. We hardly even touched the 80s.
We hardly touched it.
We did pretty well, though.
I mean,
we did pretty well.
You didn't talk about
next time we
Motel Hell, the Changeling, the Frog.
Hell.
I mean, come on, Sean.
Motel Hell. That leads to Rory Calhoun.
See? So we're gonna have to have him.
We will
Courtney
definitely
come
have you
back.
back. Yes.
Oh well, thank you very much.
If you'll have
wonderful.
us.
Yes. No,
We can do the
are you
80s
kidding?
part 2.
This is.
I say we do all of recorded history.
Yeah.
No.
We have to do
starting
the
with the
80s.
Big Bang.
No, we're not going to do that.
We
We'll
actually
just
have to do the 80s because you were just saying, now we have a title, 80s 2 Electric Boogaloo. So we have to
Perfect.
How would Rondo Hatton fare in the 1980s?
Can he roller skate?
Yes.
Listeners, you can find us on Facebook at Monster Party TV and on YouTube at Monster Party TV. Follow us on Twitter at Monster Party HQ. If you're listening to us on iTunes, please take a moment and write a review. We would love that.
And if I may plug something of my own.
Would you like to plug something, Matt?
I would. I have a comedy CD.
Do you have a CD?
I have a comedy CD during my time in the stand-up comedy world.
Yeah.
It's my little funny things on a CD that you can listen to.
And it actually is pretty funny. It actually made me laugh quite a bit.
You're a very kind man.
No, I'm not being
kind. I take back everything I said.
No, I actually did not want to laugh. And I'm sorry, you had me in stitches, so it is a really good
It made
CD.
me a guffaw.
Wow. Very impressive. I'm going to need you to write that down and then sign it.
But it just made James want to go see Interiors again. So.
But it's called Dead Funny, and you can find it on CD Baby on my website. And just, I'll bring it to you if I have to. That being said, I am Matt Weinhold.
I am Shawn Sheridan.
I'm Larry Stroth.
And I'm James Gonis.
Keep America strong.
Watch 80s movies.
80s movies.